Just one more day for the coronation. The UK government is equal parts excited and worried. Excited for the new king, worried because he's not so popular. Republican groups are planning a big protest on Saturday. At least 1,000 people will hit the streets. It promises to be a PR disaster for London, and you can see why. There's a camera and a journalist on every street. If there's a protest, they will capture it. And that's what Britain is trying to avoid. How? By implementing a new anti-protest law. It was being debated for a long time, but on Wednesday, the UK government fast-tracked it. Talk about perfect timing. The coronation is on Saturday and the law gets implemented on Wednesday. But if you ask the British government, they say it's a coincidence. So what exactly does this law say? There are three things that you should know. Number one, if you block roads, airports or railways, you get 12 months in jail. That is the maximum punishment. Number two, if you cling on to buildings or people, you could get 6 months in jail, plus unlimited fine. And number three, the police can stop and frisk suspects. How do you define suspects? Well, the cops decide that. This hurried decision by the UK government reveals two things. A, they're scared of the Republicans. The Home Office has even written a letter to them. It warns against disrupting public events. And B, Britain's utter hypocrisy on public protests. The Security Minister has defended this new law. He says it won't curb demonstrations. Listen to this. Anti-monarchists would still have the liberty to protest, but they would not have the liberty to disrupt others. That's where we are drawing a difference. Well, nothing wrong with that. Protests do tend to spiral out of control. One moment, there is a peaceful sit-in. The next thing you know, your biggest highway is blocked. Stuff like that is a headache for common people. Plus, it doesn't actually solve anything. So putting reasonable restrictions on protests is not really wrong. I underline the word reasonable. But Britain was not so understanding when protests happened elsewhere. You may remember the farmer protests in India. One of the key roads near the national capital was blocked. What was Britain's response then? They decided to debate the issue in the House of Commons. British MPs criticised India's handling of the protests. The year was 2021. Now imagine the opposite happening. Imagine the Indian Parliament debating Britain's new anti-protest law, or Indian MPs defending the rights of Republican protesters. It won't happen because it's absurd, because it's none of New Delhi's business. Western countries love to lecture on freedoms and democracies, but within their borders, they love cracking down. Remember these pictures from Canada? They're from last year's anti-vax protests. Justin Trudeau's cops were on a rampage. They used tear gas and batons to disperse the protesters. Now, we don't agree with their cause, but we have to ask, what happened to Trudeau? In 2021, he advised India to use democracy and dialogue. The very next year, he forgot both. Same with France right now. The pension protests are never ending. There is violence and destruction on the streets of Paris. But how many times has President Macron met the protesters? Did he prefer talks? Or did he bulldoze the law through parliament? He did the latter. Macron stuck to his reform. He is even targeting journalists who took part in the protest. Last month, a French publisher was arrested in London. He was held on charges of terrorism. His crime? Taking part in the pension protests. It tells you a lot about Western double standards. And we're not saying that their restrictions are wrong. Blocking roads is indeed a public hassle. So is destroying property or peddling vaccine hesitancy. We are saying measure every country by the same yardsticks. If blocking roads in Britain is not okay, why is it okay in New Delhi or Colombo or Bangkok? Anti-monarchy protests have really exposed Britain's insecurity. For all the talk of royal solidity, they're scared. Scared about 1,000 odd protesters on Coronation Day. Now, I've seen governments defend new laws and reforms against public backlash. It happens all the time in democracy. But in London, the government is defending the past, something they did not start, and something they have no plans to end.